Think about the last time you fell apart. Not felt sad. Not had a hard week. Actually fell apart, in front of someone without managing it, without immediately reassembling. For some people that memory is recent. For others it's distant, unclear. Maybe it was childhood. Maybe it hasn't happened at all, at least not anywhere anyone could see. And if you're the second kind of person, the kind for whom falling apart in front of someone feels not just uncomfortable but structurally impossible, this video is for you. Not because something is wrong with you, but because that structure didn't build itself. There are people for whom weakness was simply never available as an option. Not because nothing hard ever happened to them. Often quite the opposite. But because the environment they grew up in never created the conditions where falling apart was safe. Where distress was met with warmth. Where being small and struggling produced comfort rather than discomfort in the people around them. And so they adapted the way all children do to what was actually on offer. They became strong. Not as a personality trait they developed. As a survival strategy they learned. And here's what's curious about survival strategies. They don't retire when the original situation ends. They become automatic. They run in the background, in rooms that are nothing like the one where they were written, for decades. Until the person wearing the strategy can no longer easily separate themselves from it. Until they can't tell anymore whether they're strong, or whether they've just never been safe enough to be anything else. Research by James Gross at Stanford, one of the most influential emotion researchers of the last 3 decades, draws a sharp distinction between 2 ways people manage difficult emotions. Cognitive reappraisal. Changing how you think about a situation so the emotional response shifts naturally. And expressive suppression. Allowing the emotion to arise internally while preventing any outward expression of it. His research consistently shows that suppression carries significant costs. The emotion doesn't disappear. Goes underground. And the physiological and cognitive load of keeping it there accumulates in ways that reappraisal simply doesn't produce. The person who was never allowed to be weak is, in most cases, a chronic suppressor. Not by choice. By formation. Being the strong one wasn't a choice you made. It was a role that formed around you. Before you were old enough to decide whether you wanted it. And somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like something you did. And started feeling like something you were. I've gone much deeper into how this happens. And what it costs over time. Everything is linked in the description. And in the first pinned comment. John Bowlby's work on attachment established something that has been replicated many times since. When a child's distress signals are consistently not met, not necessarily punished, sometimes simply ignored or deflected, or received with discomfort rather than warmth, the child learns to suppress those signals. The attachment system, which evolved to broadcast need in order to bring proximity and care, gets dialed down. Not because the need disappears. Because broadcasting it stopped working. And the child who learned that becomes the adult who doesn't know how to let anyone see them struggle. Who, when something goes wrong, moves immediately to function. What needs to be handled? What can be controlled? The emotional experience, the fear, the grief, the longing for someone to just be there, gets filed somewhere. Later. Private. If at all. This isn't emotional maturity. It's emotional efficiency born from necessity. And here's what Gross's research makes clear that most people in this pattern have never been told. Suppression is not selective. You cannot suppress one category of emotional expression and leave the rest intact. When the channel gets narrowed, when you train yourself over years not to show the hard things, the channel narrows for everything. Not just the tears. Also the laughter that goes all the way down. The joy that makes you feel genuinely open. The tenderness that doesn't immediately get managed into something useful. The person who was never allowed to be weak often can't fully feel the good things either. Not because they're numb. Because the architecture that keeps the weakness in also keeps the softness in. And the softness is the same channel. And there's something else. Something that runs even deeper than the suppression itself. The performance of strength, after long enough, stops feeling like a performance. It becomes the face the person presents to every room they walk into. Reliable, together, capable of handling it. And the face becomes so consistent that the people around them start to depend on its consistency. They stop checking in. They stop asking how you're doing with any real expectation of an honest answer. Because the answer is always fine, or some version of it. And there's nothing in the delivery that invites them to push further. And slowly, quietly, the person wearing the face becomes invisible inside it. But here's what most people who love someone like this never fully understand. The strength isn't covering weakness. It's covering the fear of what would happen if weakness were seen. Because for someone whose vulnerability was never safely received, that fear is specific and physical and old. It's not a thought. It's a prediction that the body made decades ago, in a room where showing need changed something, where distress made things worse, where being small cost something real. And the body doesn't care that the room is different now. It doesn't verify the current conditions before it fires the response. It just knows. Don't let them see it. Keep the face on. Handle it. The person who was never allowed to be weak didn't become strong. They became armored. And armor doesn't feel like protection from the inside. It feels like weight. And that weight accumulates in a very specific place. Not in the body exactly, though it shows up there too. In the shoulders, in the jaw, in the low-level tension that never fully releases even in sleep. But deeper than that. In the relational architecture. In the way the person who was never allowed to be weak has organized every significant relationship around what they can provide rather than what they need. Around capability rather than vulnerability. Around what they can carry rather than what they'd like to put down. And the people who love them, who have often been on the receiving end of extraordinary generosity, rarely know what it's costing. Because the strength is consistent. The face is reliable. And nothing in the presentation invites the question of whether there's something underneath that needs to be seen. Which means the person who was never allowed to be weak is often the most thoroughly unknown person in the room. Admired from a distance that looks like closeness. Depended on in ways that look like connection. Surrounded by people who would help, if only they were ever told that help was needed. They're not told. Because asking was never an option the environment made available. And the armor that was built to keep that environment manageable became, without anyone deciding it, the shape of an entire life. But there's something else about this armor that the research on emotional suppression has documented. Something that goes beyond the relational cost and touches something more interior. The person who has never been safe enough to be weak has, in many cases, also never been safe enough to fully want. To reach. To need out loud. And needing out loud is the beginning of desire, not just the surface-level kind, but the deeper kind. The desire to be close, to be held, to matter to someone specifically and not just functionally. James Gross's work on suppression and the narrowing of emotional range finds its most specific expression here. The person who suppresses the hard things doesn't just lose access to pain or fear or grief. They lose access to the vocabulary of need itself. The felt sense of what wanting help feels like, what it feels like to be genuinely held rather than merely functional within a relationship. And without that vocabulary, reaching for it becomes nearly impossible. Not because the need isn't there. Because the part of the self that knows how to reach has been so thoroughly trained out of practice that it has forgotten the motion. And what accumulates, over years of armored functioning, is not just exhaustion. It is a kind of interior poverty. A scarcity not of resources or of love available in the room, but of the felt permission to receive it. The people around the armored person may be offering something real. But the offer cannot land in a place that has never learned to stay open. That's what the armor ultimately costs. Not just connection. The capacity for it. There's something I want to say to the person who showed up for everyone this week and still feels like it wasn't enough. It was enough. You were enough. The problem isn't how much you gave. The problem is a pattern that was never really fair to you. And that has a story behind it. I've spent a long time writing about that story. It's linked in the description. And in the first pinned comment. Now I want to speak to you directly. Imagine someone you trust, someone who has given you no reason to doubt them, sitting across from you and asking with genuine care, "How are you really doing?" What happens in your body in the moment before you answer? For most people in this pattern, something tightens. Some version of the face comes up. And what comes out is a managed response, true enough to not be a lie, contained enough to not require anything from the other person. And then the moment passes. I want you to notice what you protected in that moment. Not from them, they were safe in this version. From yourself. From the possibility of saying something that might actually need a response. From the discomfort of being seen in a moment of genuine struggle and not being able to control what happens next. That protection is the pattern. And it's costing you something specific. Not just the connection that could have happened in that moment, but the accumulated weight of every moment like it. Every time the real answer went unspoken, every time the face came up instead of the feeling, every time you handled something alone that was never meant to be carried alone. You are not running low on strength. You are running low on the relief that comes from putting it down. And here's the thing about armor. It was built to be worn in a specific battle. That battle is long over. The people in your life now are not the room where the armor went on. Most of them have never even seen the version of you that needed it. You don't have to take it all off at once. That's not how this works, and it would be dishonest to suggest it is. But maybe, in one conversation with one person who has earned it, you could say something true. Something that doesn't come pre-managed. Something that lands in the room and stays there. Not because weakness is the goal. 'Cause contact is. And contact requires something the armor was built to prevent. If this video put words to something you've been carrying for a long time, leave me a comment. Tell me what strength has cost you. I read every one. Subscribe if you haven't, because what comes next goes into what happens inside the body when emotions are held for too long. That one changes how you understand everything that came before it. You don't want to miss it.